So I'd say maybe about a month ago, the Lord began really stirring in my heart, really connecting with people outside of the church is kind of the way that it was formulating in my mind. And I began to think, how do I do that? And so for me, in context of what I do, I kind of came up with this, well, it wasn't like me idea, but I had this idea about having lunch with a pastor. And so I started thinking about ways that I can do this. Now, I was like, I could do it on Craigslist. But then I thought, oh, who knows what kind of crazies I'd get off Craigslist. Like people who are angry at the church, people who are just like wanting to set you up. So I was like, Craigslist, probably not the smartest thing. But I began to really just stir inside of me and figure out how am I gonna do this? So then I thought, well, I could also put out like an ad at like a coffee shop, kind of put your phone number out there. Again, you don't know who you're going to get. And so I started actually, in the midst of doing this, I was going to get a pedicure and a manicure. Now, that may sound really silly to some people, but what was happening was there was a former student of ours who actually works at this nail salon. And he's kind of walked away. His idea, his hope was that he's told me before, I just want to be a normal Christian. Like, that's his goal. And I, at the time, being his youth pastor, asked, well, what does it even mean to be a normal Christian? And so, as you guys are obviously walking and pursuing God and your faith in Christ, you realize that those two words don't really work together in what we want it to mean. He wants just a very unriskful, just, hey, I'm going to go to heaven relationship with Christ. And so he then later kind of just left the church on just whatever terms. He wasn't really angry at anyone, but wasn't really willing to surrender to God either. So he just walked away. And he actually he now works at this nail salon. And so the first time I ever went in, I sat down. He ended up giving me a pedicure, and pedicures are where they work on your feet. And I remember sitting there thinking of just how humbling that must have been for him. How almost even in a sense shameful that would be. And so I began using this opportunity to go get a pedicure and a manicure to actually begin to minister to him. So my visible cost was my pedicure and manicure. Now, I didn't actually tell Jay how much it costs off the bat. It wasn't until I think I took Samantha with me, and he went, "You spent how much?" And I said, "Oh, well, yeah, it's kind of expensive." But I really was honestly doing it unto the Lord. Like, Lord, I'm just going to use this, because I had an hour and a half to 2 hours of his undivided time. That meant he had to sit there and give me attention and listen to all of my craziness that was going on in my life. And so he walked through when we were going to Russia, when we were going to convention, when we were doing summer camp, all familiar things that he knows because he used to come to church. So he knows all of those things. Well, then I was sitting there, and all of a sudden my conversation began to turn to the person to the left or to the right of me. And something that I have found that's been a really great talking tool has been my chickens. Now, for those of you that do or don't know, I have chickens. I've been raising them for eggs. But it has been actually such a neutral talking point with people, because it doesn't have to do about my children, which really, unless, I say this often, unless you're really invested in my life, you don't really care too much about my children. You don't care how well they're doing, how great they're doing in football, what they're struggling with. That's not going to matter to the average person. But the chickens began to be this talking point that anyone can all of a sudden relate to, because chickens are kind of this buzzword going on. And so the Lord began to just have me and show me how to utilize these conversations with people around me. Now, as I was saying, one of my ministry spots really is the nail salon, because they all know me there as well. So I'm talking, and since then, I started looking around and began to just extend myself in conversation and ask people, really what the Lord was putting in my heart was their story. What is your story? Because here's what I've realized is that every person has a story. Every person actually has a story and how Jesus plays into their story. It may be in a negative context. It may be in a very glorious context, but he is a part of everyone's story. And what my heart and my hope as I've been doing this is, and I'll tell a little bit more, but what my heart and hope is that they would begin to discover where Jesus is in their story, and that I would be okay with him being in a negative light. Because we know that we're victorious in Christ. We know that victory is in Christ. So when people come and they are completely turned off by Jesus, what threat is that to me? There is no threat. Because it's not my reputation. It's not based on me. It's based on Christ. What I've also been doing is I committed to the Lord that if he showed me someone, whether I was in Target, whether I was in Sam's Club, I actually invited someone to Sam's Club to do this, that I would invite them to hear their story. So I now carry my business cards, and I just ask people, hey, would you have coffee with me? I want to hear your story. And so I am having a conversation with someone tomorrow in the afternoon. I've already met with someone already a few weeks ago at the coffee shop. And really my heart is that through this, that people would discover Jesus again. And I think I don't really know what you're talking about, but I think that's what you wanted me to share, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So it's been great. It's been nerve-wracking. I was in Target, because here's the thing, it's going to interrupt your life. Bringing people to Christ, being Christ to other people will interrupt your life. I was in Target, and I felt like the Lord said, that person. And so I was in my circle of, like, my list circle. That was the list that's in my head, which is already crazy enough. And so I was going, I'm like, okay. And I walked away, and then I just realized, I said, if I see her again, I will stop and ask her. Well, I got caught on my to-do list and going and rushing through Target. And what I felt the Lord said, because I checked out and I left, is what I felt the Lord said was, there's no negotiating with me. Because the reality is that people's salvation are in the balance. And it's not that I sit there and I think, oh, every person's going to hell. I mean, even if someone knows Jesus and they've walked away from Christ, how much are they not experiencing here on earth? Because we know our relationship with Christ isn't just being one with him at one point. It's experiencing him here on earth. And so my hope is that as I begin to sit down and have conversations, so I'm doing a little safer route with people that I know, like, hey, do you have anyone that would want to sit down and have coffee with me? And I want to just hear their story, because I figured if I'm going out on my own, probably need to just go a wiser route, not the safer route. I'm not looking into doing safe, just the wise thing to do, which is not put my phone number and myself on Craigslist. So the Lord's really been stirring in me is just finding out people's story and then really helping them discover where Jesus is in the midst of that. And then hopefully, ultimately, that they would rediscover Christ in their own life. So.
Hey, great. That's awesome.